Shannon's putting words in my mouth. I didn't promise anything.
He did.
I'm just get us out of here as soon as we can. I want to thank Shannon and Lori for having me. I want to especially thank them for putting me last. I know lunchtime, right after lunchtime is usually nap time, so at this point in time I expect everybody to be wide awake and chipper and ready to go. Hopefully you got your nap earlier. So we'll go ahead and get started. Like she said, my name is Tyler Michael. We're going to talk about House and Old Act 1031 turned into statute. We creatively titled this Finding Resolutions. Remember that, and I'll circle at the end of my presentation, I'll circle back around to that and explain exactly what that means. Excuse me. So before we really get into the heart of this, just a little background information on what this is. House Bill 1031 dealt with repeat findings. Any finding that's in our report from one audit period to the next, if it's repeated, that's what this bill's discussing. Obviously, it was a House bill, Household Act. As of July 1, it became statute there at 511.5 1.5. And then Representative Slager. Representative Slager is a representative from, I believe, northwest Indiana. He's the one that authored this bill. This was not a statute that we went out and we fought for and that we asked to be passed. He authored this. He did the work. He got this passed. But it is something that we supported for obvious reasons. A little background on Representative Slager. He spent, it's my understanding, he spent about a dozen years on the board of a local conservancy district up in northwest Indiana, so his background is at least a little bit in local government. Again, before we really get into this, a couple definitions. In the statute, they use the terminology findings. You and I think we probably both have a specific definition. When we say findings, we typically think about federal findings. However, when they use this in this statute, we're talking about both federal findings and resulting comments. The resulting comments being when there's noncompliance with Indiana statute or one of our uniform compliance guidelines. So when you see findings in the statute, when I say it today, I'm talking about both. They also use examination or examination report. When they use this, they're talking about any engagement that we do. We do multiple kinds of engagements. For counties, we mostly just do audits. For some, we do examinations. For some, we do just compliance reviews. When they use examination, they're talking about any engagement type and any report type that we issue. Lastly, they talk about the audit committee. This audit committee is a very specific group of people. There are 5 legislators that currently make up the audit committee. And this audit committee was created in the statute a few years ago, and it's basically our agencies, the State Board of Accounts. It's basically our oversight body. It's who we report to. They monitor us, and they will have a hand, as you'll see in this statute. Over the next 8 or so slides, I think if you printed out the handouts, I put in the notes at the bottom, I put the statute verbatim. I didn't want to throw that all on a screen and then read that to you. That's really boring. I'm boring enough the way it is, so I didn't want to make it worse. So at the top, I'm just going to put what the statute is and then highlight a couple things out of each of those. But again, if you have the handouts, you should have those statutes verbatim. Section A says this applies to an audited entity. What is an audited entity? For counties, you're considered a municipality, so you fall under the statute from that standpoint. Part B basically says if there is a finding in a report, the audited entity must address that. In my mind, this is nothing new, but it wasn't really written down before. So we come in, we find noncompliance, we write it up. It's the audited entities, in your case, it's the county's responsibility to fix that noncompliance moving forward. The important part of the statute is Part C. This is where it takes it one step further. We're talking about repeat findings. So in any subsequent report, if there is the same or substantially the same finding, at that point in time, it's considered a repeat finding. If you have a repeat finding, you're going to be required to fill out and submit to us a corrective action plan. At any point in time, yell at me if you have a question. We all want to make sure we're all on the same page before we leave here today. So Part D talks a little bit more about the corrective action plan. Basically just says it's our agencies, the State Board of Accounts, responsibility to come up with what the guidelines for that corrective action plan are, what has to go in that. One of the stipulations is that the corrective action plan has to be completed within 6 months. So they tell us that we have to come up with the guidelines, but they also tell us that one of the guidelines is it has to be completed within 6 months. Part E goes in to talk about what happens when the corrective action plan is completed. At that point in time, you have to let us know that it's been completed, notify us. At that point, we review that, make sure that the issue, the noncompliance, has been corrected. If you don't ever submit a corrective action plan to us, or if you submit a corrective action plan to us and then you don't follow through and fix the noncompliance, at that point in time, we have to prepare a memo to the audit committee. All right, so in Part E, we prepare the memo. Part F, we submit that memo to the audit committee. Currently, the audit committee meets once a year. I believe they have a meeting come up next week. But with this, the fact that we're going to possibly send them memos, we anticipate that they will meet at least a little more often, but we don't know exactly how that's going to work yet. So we'll submit the memo to the audit committee. Once they receive that, they have 7 different options. The first one being they can request a written statement from the public official, whoever is responsible for that corrective action plan. They can request a statement saying, hey, this is why we haven't corrected it yet. They can require attendance at their meeting. The third option, I'm not 100% sure what this adds, but they can tell you, hey, you have to take corrective action. To me, if we're at this point, then we've already failed to do that. So, like I said, I'm not really sure what that one adds. The next option the audit committee has is just to notify the officer, if there's a chief executive officer of the unit, as well as the legislative body and the fiscal body, that, hey, this noncompliance has occurred in multiple reports and it's not being corrected. Depending on what the noncompliance is, if it's noncompliance with a couple specific statutes, they have the ability to notify the local prosecutor. In both of those cases, I believe it's 511.110 and 511.121. In that statute, it says if you fail to do this, it's a Class C infraction and you can be removed from office. So if it's a violation of one of those 2 specific statutes, and I rattle those off, but don't quote me on that. I'm 99% sure that's what those are, but don't hold me to that. If it's a violation of those, they will notify the local prosecutor, and then they have the ability to start proceedings to remove an elected official from office. Another option, and this is to us, to our agency, this is the biggest option and the most important part of this. Being legislators, it's a very difficult word. Being legislators, they have the ability to obviously enact a law change. So if it's a situation where the law is not clear, maybe there's conflicting law, or it's just a situation where our agency and your county disagree on what's going on, the audit committee obviously has the ability to change the law, to clarify it, et cetera. The last option they have is basically just to turn around and tell us, hey, go back in and do another more current examination immediately. All right, so that's all the statute. We'll circle back now, go into a little more depth on a couple things here. So I already talked about, we're using the term findings. This applies to both federal findings, both Section 2 and Section 3 findings, as well as results and comments. In the past, when we've had results and comments, as I'm sure all of you are aware, we either put those results and comments in the public report. If we deem that to be important enough, we'll put it in the public report. And The other option that we've always had is just a verbal comment where we just tell you, hey, yeah, technically you're not in compliance, but we're not going to put, it doesn't rise to a level where we think it needs to go in a public report. Moving forward, those two options are going to still exist. But what we're doing with this is we are adding a third option in between. So moving forward, we have non-compliance issues, results and comments that we deem that are substantial and impactful to the unit and or the community. We will put those in the public report still. For those that are isolated and trivial, really are not a big deal, but technically you're not in compliance, we'll do that. We'll still do that verbal comment. In between that, for comments that don't meet one of those two definitions, don't meet that they're substantial and impactful, or they don't meet the definition of isolated and trivial, we're going to put in a management letter. This management letter we will present to you at the exit conference. We'll present a draft to you at the exit conference. It'll go through our review process, and then when we issue the public report, we will also send you the management letter. Moving forward, we foresee that the majority of noncompliance that we find will go in a management letter moving forward. We'll see exactly how that plays out, but that's our anticipation with that. We've spent most of the summer training our staff on what we're going to deem substantial and impactful. There's a whole lot of judgment in that. We understand that, but we have been training our staff so that hopefully we'll continue to get more, as a staff, as an agency, that we'll continue to get on the same page and be consistent with that across the state. All right, a brief timeline. Technically, the law went into effect July 1, but because of the changes being made, both what we have to do internally, as far as the guidelines for the corrective action plan, how we're going to track this information, as well as training you guys on what the law says. We've kind of delayed the implementation of it a little bit. So for the management letter, any report that we're working on, engagement that we're working on, that we have an exit conference, after October 1st is when we will start issuing those management letters. So it probably doesn't apply to anybody in here. We're only a couple weeks in. But if you've had an exit conference in the last 2 weeks, you'll probably get you probably discussed a management letter at that point in time. Hey, I put the date up there. For the corrective action plan, we will begin requiring the corrective action plan for those engagements that we begin after December 1st of this year, and that we also exit after February 1st of next year. So it has to meet both those criteria. So if we begin your county audit after December 1st of this year, and we are going to exit after February 1st of next year, you will be required to submit the corrective action plan to us. I'll go on, talk more about the corrective action plan in just a minute. But first, the management letter and the corrective action plan, from our standpoint, is part of our work papers. So when we come up with a management letter, we send that to you. You submit the corrective action plan to us. That's part of our work papers. If somebody comes to us and says, hey, submits a public records request and say, hey, I want X county's corrective action plan, we're going to say, sorry, that's part of our work papers, you can't have it. The caveat in that is, from your standpoint, we're not sure. So we're kind of asking you guys, your association, to do that work and work with the public access counselor to see from your standpoint if that's going to be subject to the public access laws. All right, getting a little bit more into the corrective action plan. First, I'll go through exactly what's in there. It's going to be detailed. Okay. So first, you're going to have to put the unit name, and I think I'll go into this a little bit later in one of the other slides. But this will all be submitted online. We have a form online that you'll go in and just you'll fill it out, hit submit, and that'll email to us. So obviously, we're going to need to know what unit it is. So Hamilton County, Marion County, whatever it is. The report period, typically at January 1 through December 31st. The title of the finding. If it's a resultant comment, there will be a specific title, say condition of records or internal controls, or whatever it is. If it's a federal finding, you'll have to put in the finding number. So typically that's 2015-001, 2015-002. The contact person, who's responsible within your county to submit this corrective action plan, and then ultimately be responsible for following up and making sure that the corrective action is taken. So we need that person, their contact information, email account, phone number, that type of thing. The next thing, in your own words, you'll have to restate what the issue is. We want to make sure here, by putting this in your own words, we want to make sure that you really understand what the noncompliance was. So you have to, like I said, in your own words, state what the noncompliance was. From there, then you'll have to list what the requirement was that wasn't followed. Like I said, that would typically be a state statute or one of our uniform compliance guidelines. You'll have to submit a response with that. If you agree that, yeah, you're in noncompliance, you'll just state that. If you disagree, that's fine. Put that in there. Be detailed on why you disagree, why you think you are in compliance. You'll also have to put the root cause. What happened? What happened within your agency, within your county, that created this noncompliance? Is it an internal control issue? Yes, it's always going to be an internal control issue, most likely. But what's going on? What happened within your agency, within your county, that caused this noncompliance? You'll next list the steps that you'll be taking. Again, we'll expect this to be detailed. Step 1, we're going to do this, this, and this. Step 2, we're going to have the county commissioners pass this policy. Whatever that is, we'll expect to see that detailed, what those steps are. With that, and this goes back to the statute, you'll often include a timeline of those steps. So if you say step 1, we're going to do this, this, and this, within the timeline, we're going to expect to see that step 1 is going to take 1 month. Step 2, you're going to take these steps. Step 2 is going to take 2 months. So again, very detailed in your steps, and again with the timeline when you expect for each step to be completed. If there are situations where it may take longer than 6 months, we expect this to be rare, few and far between, but we know that's going to happen. So if that's the case, that's fine, but you'll have to explain why correcting this issue is going to take longer than 6 months. Excuse me. And then lastly, you'll just put a summary of how the steps that you put in there will fix the noncompliance. So that's everything that's going to have to go in the corrective action plan. We come in, we do the engagement. I'm sure, as you're all aware, we have the exit conference. We are going to ask that you communicate with us within 10 days of the exit conference. With the corrective action plan being as detailed as it is, we don't anticipate you being able to get that done in that amount of time, which is fine. But we are going to ask that you either A, submit the corrective action plan to us within 10 days, or contact us at this email address and say, hey, I need a little bit more time. It's a little more complicated than that. I need more than 10 days. That's fine. We expect that to happen in most situations, but we do want some type of communication within 10 days of the exit conference, just to make sure we know that you're working on it. Like I said, there's a form on our website that you'll fill out. We do have a template in a PDF, just so that our examiners can provide you. That we'll send that out to you soon, sometime this fall, and it'll be on our website. So you'll have you'll have that template whenever you want it, so you can see exactly what you're going to need to put in there. Also, you guys have those already. I put those on the website, so you guys should be able to see that now. Looking at the federal corrective action plan versus our corrective action plan, I really wish we could have come up with another name besides corrective action plan, because this gets very sticky and very confusing. When you have a federal finding, for every federal finding you have to submit a corrective action plan that goes in the public report. Again, hopefully we're all aware of that already. Typically, that corrective action plan that goes with the federal findings is not extremely detailed. A lot of times it just says, hey, we're going to correct this issue. which is fine for that. That's not going to work for our corrective action plan. So if you have a situation where you have a federal finding that is also a repeat finding, so you've had the same federal finding in multiple reports in a row, you're going to have to do both corrective action plans. Since our corrective action plan that we're going to require is much more detailed, if you want to do that and just submit that once and use that for both corrective action plans, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. The problem with that is then if you do that, we're going to have that before the exit conference. We can't exit on a federal finding until we have your corrective action plan to put in the report. So again, in that case, there's a couple problems. One, you're going to have to get it done quicker before the exit conference, and two, at that point in time, it's going to go on the public report. So you do have that option. We don't anticipate most people doing that. I've never done one of the federal corrective action plans, so I don't know how long it takes, but my assumption is it doesn't take a whole lot of time to throw something down and submit that. So our assumption is that you will still do 2 separate corrective action plans in that situation. All right, so you submit the corrective action plan. We'll approve that. We'll send that back to you and say, hey, yeah, we approve this. Then at that point, you're gonna follow your corrective action plan. You're gonna go through the steps that you said you're gonna go through. Hopefully, you're gonna follow the timeline you said. When you complete your corrective action plan, at that point in time, you're gonna have to contact us again. Again, we're gonna use the same email address. It's just cap@sboa.in.gov. Hopefully, it's not hard to remember. We'll have it on our website as well. But once you complete your corrective action plan, you'll contact us, say, hey, this is done. At that point in time, we have to review that and verify. So depending on what steps you take, that may be as simple as you emailing us an ordinance or resolution that was passed. And that ordinance or resolution fixed the noncompliance. If that's the case, we'll do that electronically. You'll just email that to us and we'll say, hey, yeah, that's great. Well done. It may be a situation where we have to send one of our staff members back out to verify. So depending on the situation, but you do have to contact us, tell us it's done, and we have to verify and make sure that noncompliance is fixed moving forward. If within 6 months it's not submitted to us, you never submit a corrective action plan, or it's not corrected, the noncompliance issue is not corrected, we have to prepare and send that memo to the audit committee. In those situations where the corrective action plan is going to take longer than 6 months, again, that's fine. We're still going to submit the memo. We still have to submit the memo to the audit committee, but in that memo we'll say, hey, the corrective action plan says it's going to take them 9 months. They're on track with that. We don't have any worries, but we do still have to submit that memo to them. All right, I told you we would come back, finish on the finding resolutions. This is, I will read this quote to you. This is from Representative Slager as they were going through the process of having hearings about this. He did an interview, I believe it was with the Tribune Star in Terre Haute, which is where I got this quote. But in this article he said, I remember saying, rather than spending time writing letters trying to justify why we do things differently, why don't we just fix the problem? So my understanding is this kind of goes back to his days when he was on that Conservancy District Board. My assumption, I'm making assumptions here, my assumption is they would have a noncompliance finding and their financial director was justifying, hey, we have this finding, but it's okay because this, and this. His thought process is instead of fighting with us, instead of saying, yeah, we're in noncompliance, but that's okay, why don't we fix the problem? So that's kind of the heart behind this. We are 100% on board with that. We don't see this as being a local government unit issue. We see this as being a state issue between our agency and the local government. So with that, every noncompliance that we find and that we write up, whether we put it in the report, whether we put it in the management letter, or it's just a verbal comment, we have trained our staff. They are going to provide you potential solutions to those, ways that you could potentially, steps you could potentially take to fix that noncompliance. We are an auditing agency. Because of independence reasons, we can't tell you what to do. We can't make management decisions for you. So these potential solutions are not binding, but it is suggestions that we make, say, hey, if you do this, this, and this, you're not going to have that non-compliance anymore. When we do that, take those, use them if you want. We should give you multiple possible solutions. Combine them, come up with your own. We don't care how the solution gets fixed, but we do want to work with you and give you options. Our goal is to come in and not write up findings anymore. We don't want the corrective action plans. We don't want to go through the work to write up findings, find noncompliance. The whole goal with this is for us to work together, to work with you guys to figure out a way to fix those noncompliance issues. The last point with this is not set up as an appeals process, but we've been asked a lot in the past. We'll write somebody up for a noncompliance issue, and they'll turn around and say, hey, you're wrong. We disagree with you. And in the past, people said, hey, so what's our appeals process? What can we do? And it's kind of always been, well, tough luck. We're going to put it in the report anyway. That's not entirely true. You've always had the option to include an official response in the report. That's not going to change. You'll still have that opportunity to include an official response. But if that situation comes up where, for whatever reason, whether we interpret the statute differently, there's just a disagreement, we'll go through all these steps. You'll submit the corrective action plan. After 6 months, we'll submit the memo to the audit committee. At that point, we'll just say, hey, there's a disagreement here. You need to do something, whether it be take a side or hopefully change the law, make the law more clear. So no, it's not completely an appeals process, but we think it's going to work that way in those situations. So do we have any questions at this point? Yes, down in front. Shannon, are you coming? Right here.
So most of us are going to have repeat findings because of you being behind with the audits. So, I mean, is there anything being done about that, or are we just going to have to suck it up and? Well,
we are behind. We recognize that. Ultimately, I don't know that us being behind affects this. When we implement it, whenever we implement this, even if we weren't behind, we would be in that same boat where there's a transition period where this wasn't in effect and now it is. So yes, we're behind. I don't know that affects this necessarily.
Well, because we're getting 2 audits at once.
If you're getting 2 audits at once, there's not in the statute. There's no stipulation for that, but we will take that into account and work with you in that. We understand. Hopefully, getting 2 audits at the exact same time isn't happening a whole lot, but I know that has happened. So if that's the case, we understand that. No, there's not an exact process to get us out of these stipulations, but we do understand that, and we will work with you on an individual basis in those situations. Any other questions? Okay. I'm supposed to talk about our website as well, but my guess is that you've completely checked out at this point, so there's no use in that. But our website's out there. What? It's not there yet. So Shannon's giving me suggestions, but I don't like them, so I'm going to ignore her. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll hang out as long as you want if you do have questions. My email address is communications, then it's @sboa.in.gov. If you have any questions about the 1031 stuff, about our website, about emails that we send out, let me know, and we'll all address those for you. Other than that, have a great evening. I think Shannon's going to wrap up for us before we actually dismiss.
Well, I bet you guys are all ready to go after this fun-filled day. Before you go, just make sure that you sign in for the day, because if you don't sign in today, these won't be out tomorrow. We'll have new sign-in sheets, again, same place tomorrow, so as you're coming in, just go ahead and sign in. There wasn't any announcements from the associations, so unless anyone else has any questions, you are free to go and enjoy your evening, just not too much.